welcome back to Crime in Court. We are reading through the Delphi trial transcript, Indiana versus Richard Allen in the homicides of Libby German and Abby Williams, and we are on the state's case, part 29, and we are entering into the day of October 28th, 2024. So, just to give you a timeline of where we're at, and the individual, we just finished up with Jerry Holman, and now we are going to go into Stacy Bozinovski, who is a forensic scientist, and she's going to go over all of the different pieces of DNA and things that were tested, all of the different pieces of evidence, probably. So she's going to go through all of that and more, I'm sure. So let's get started. She's going to be on the stand for a couple episodes. Just to give you a heads up, please hit that like button and let's begin. So the court says, all right, well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are back on the record in State of Indiana versus Richard Allen. I'll show the defendants here in person with counsel, the state's here by the prosecutor and his deputies. The jurors have reassembled and are ready to come into the courtroom. Is the state ready to proceed? Yes, Your Honor, says Mr. McClelland. Is the defendant ready to proceed? Mr. Rosie says, yes, ma'am. The court says, gentlemen. Bailiff says, all rise. The jury enters the courtroom. The bailiff says, thank you. You may be seated. The court says, all right. Looks like everybody's getting all settled in over there again for the day's proceedings. So, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to see you back this morning. I know over the weekend you had the opportunity to have an activity on Saturday, and then you also had the opportunity to have some family time yesterday. I hope that was pleasant for you to do that. Remember, they're being sequestered during this I think it's a 6-week trial. And in the course of the weekend, I know that you've also had the opportunity to have access to your electronic devices so that you can communicate with family and friends and also to check your work emails. And I know several of you have some things going on at work that you've been attending to. So, in light of that, once again, have you read, seen, or heard any media accounts concerning this case? All jurors answer in the negative. The court says, have you discussed this case with anyone? All jurors say no. Have you permitted anyone to discuss this case with you? Jurors say no. Have you conducted any research into this case? All jurors respond in the negative. And finally, has anybody persisted in attempting to discuss this case with you? They all respond no. Court says, all right, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for continuing to comply with the court's directives. Are we ready to continue, Mr. Luttrell? You may call your next witness. Mr. Luttrell says, yes, Your Honor. Thank you. The state would call Stacy Bozinovich. Sorry, Bozinovski. Yeah, same thing. I'm Polish, so I can make fun of that. That I said ski instead of, or Vich instead of ski. I don't know. Anyways, I'm a dummy. The state would call Stacy Bozinovski. So now we will have direct examination with Mr. Luttrell. Oh, and one quick housekeeping item. I am going on a little getaway, whatever, with my mother. We're going to be gone for all next week. And I'm leaving Friday, so I'm probably not going to have a video Friday for us um, for this. So just letting you know. So Friday and all next week, no video. So apologies for that, but it is what it is, and I'm going to be somewhere where there is no recording, no streaming ability. So sorry about that, but we will return when I get back. So, okay, let's get started. Mr. Luttrell doing the questioning for the state of witness Stacy Bozinovski. Now I'm going to call her the other thing that I said. All right, would you state your name, please, and spell your name or first and last name? She says, my name is Stacy Bozinovski. My first name is spelled this way. Okay, she spells her names. Where are you working? I'm employed with the Indiana State Police Laboratory in Indianapolis. So in Indianapolis, Indiana, she's not she's not a law enforcement officer, but she's employed with the Indiana State Police in their laboratory in Indianapolis. What is your profession? I am a forensic scientist, or more specifically, a DNA analyst with the biology section at the laboratory. Would you tell the jury the role of a forensic scientist? My role as a forensic scientist is to perform a serological examination of evidentiary items for the presence and identification of body fluid stains or other sources of biological material. I then attempt to develop a DNA profile from those sources through DNA analysis. I compare profiles from unknown evidentiary samples to profiles from known standards of individuals that may be involved in a case. The comparison will allow me to include or exclude individuals as possible contributors to a sample. Also, as part of my role as a forensic scientist, I primarily perform casework using STR, which is autosomal STR technologies. You might be familiar with that if you followed the Idaho 4 case and all the court filings and things. They talk a lot about STR and SNP, which are the two different variation of analysis. I don't know enough to really explain it, but um, you might have more familiarity with it if you followed Idaho 4. I unfortunately didn't get to follow Idaho 4 very closely just because I've been, covering these other cases and stuff, and I would love to go back possibly and do some looking at those court documents because a lot of stuff has now been redacted and other stuff has been released. But anyways, it's another high profile case that doesn't make any sense as to the states and the media's narrative of what took place that day. And I'll just leave it at that. I don't believe anything I first hear anymore when it comes to the narrative of some crime. All right, so she says I primarily perform casework using STR autosomal STR technologies. However, I perform casework using other technologies, including YSTR analysis and next generation sequencing, which uses SNP analysis. I'm currently involved with an internal validation at our laboratory to bring on an additional technology that will bring forensic investigative genetic genealogy to the Indiana State Laboratory, and then that will allow us to use that technology on some of the most complex cases in our state. In addition, I specialize in paternity analysis or kinship analysis, which is used in unidentified human remain cases and missing persons cases, as well as criminal paternity cases. So you're in the field that is ever changing? That's correct. There's a continuous uh, there's a continuous updates and technology in the DNA field. It should be there are continuous, but we'll just read what's on the paper. And your career is an expression of that, of how you have added specialties, your area of serology and DNA. Is that correct? That would be correct. What's your educational background? I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the Indiana University in Bloomington, and I also have a Master's of Science in Forensic Science from Marshall University. And I think you've touched on some of this already, but have you obtained specialized training in the area of forensic biology, and could you explain what that additional specialized training has been? Compound question. Yes, as part of my training with the Indiana State Police Laboratory, I've completed training in both serological examinations and DNA analysis. The training included several actions about the identification of body fluids, body fluid stains, and also the theories and methods of the different stages of DNA analysis. Each training consists of various combinations of lectures, scientific readings, demonstrations, and training exercises, and I also have successfully completed examination of unknown samples, oral reviews, and written examinations as part of my training. And do you belong to any professional organizations that you can draw upon and help you do your this job? Yes, sir. Would you tell the jury what that is, what those are? I am a member of the Midwestern Association of Forensic Scientists, as well as a member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. I've received certification in the field of molecular biology with the American Board of Criminalistics. Why are those important? It's important to be a member of scientific organizations in our field to expose us to new technologies, new information that's ever present in the field of DNA analysis. Sorry, I just heard something in the house that sounded like it came from another room, but I think it was just the dog. Sorry. My certification in the field of molecular, why am I having such a hard time saying that? Sorry. My certification in the field of molecular biology also is just a voluntary process that means I have been qualified by a group of my peers as competent and proficient in that field. It's completely voluntary, not mandated by any agency to perform the science. It's just an extra credential. And is the Indiana State Police Laboratory accredited? Yes, sir. And by whom? We are accredited by an organization called ANAB, which stands for ANSI, National Accreditation Board. ANSI is an acronym that stands for American National Standards Institute. And why is that important? The accreditation process ensures and shows the reliability and accuracy of our scientific work. So, in order to complete accreditation, we have a team of qualified individuals come into our laboratory and monitor all aspects of the laboratory, including management, operations, procedures, equipment, and then they will assess all of our protocols, make sure that we're following the national standards in the forensic science community to receive accreditation. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as States Exhibit 283. Do you recognize that? Yes, sir. And what is that? States Exhibit 283 is a copy of my CV or resume that I've provided. And what's important about the information on the document? Well, this document outlines my experience within my career. It also shows the information that we've just talked about as far as my education and professional organizations, but the majority of the outline of the document outlines the scientific training that I've undergone under the course of my 18-year career with the State Police Laboratory. I would move, says Mr. Luttrell, I would move the admission, Your Honor, of this document, the CV of Ms. Bozinovski, States Exhibit 283. States offered the exhibit, no objection by Ms. Auger. The court says all right. Without objection, 283 is admitted. Mr. Luttrell says, Thank you, Your Honor. May I publish for the jury? She says, You may. Mr. Luttrell says, May we approach, Your Honor? Yes. Now we've got a quick little sidebar here. Mr. Luttrell says, We're going to be talking about so many items. The court says, Okay. But we've broken them down by report, just so you know. The court says, okay, that's good for you. Kind of like, yeah, what do you want, a cookie? Mr. Luttrell says, I have the first report, which is what the staff is organizing, but I don't have all the second items ready. The court says, okay, on the table. Can we have the staff help? Sure, says the court. Mr. Luttrell says, help get those while she's testifying. The court says, sure. Mr. Luttrell says, okay. Court says, of course. Mr. Luttrell says, I just wanted to. Sidebar conference concluded. Next question is, Does the Indiana State Police Laboratory have a quality assurance or quality control process or program in place? Yes, sir. And why is that important? The quality assurance slash quality control program at our laboratory again helps ensure the accuracy and reliability of our results. It is a process that is used to help monitor procedures, verify that we're following all of our protocols in place, and to identify any problems that might be, and to take any corrective actions if problems are identified. And is that all required by the accreditation? Is that one of the things that is demanded and expected of the agency? It is one of the standards as part of the accreditation to have that kind of protocol in place in your laboratory. Are there any elements in that program that you haven't covered so far that you'd like to share with the jury? Sure. This just leaves her open ended. I don't know if that's quite allowed, but apparently it's going to happen. She says, sure, I can give some examples of some components of the program to help put into perspective how that plays a role in our analysis. Examples of some quality control components would be the training of our analysts, the education that's required as well, the internal and external audits that our laboratory undergoes, the validation of our analytical methods, so the procedures and the processes that we are using for analysis, then the calibration of our equipment and reagents, those kinds of things that happen in the laboratory. Some examples of quality control would be some internal actions or activities that we use every day as part of our analysis. So, some examples of that would be the use of positive and negative controls to ensure that our reagents, our chemicals, are working appropriately, the wearing of proper personnel protective equipment to protect ourselves, and the evidence, the documentation that's required as part of our case analysis, the technical and administrative review process that each case undergoes as well. But all of those things are only as good as your testing. So you can have these controls in place, but whether they're effective at really identifying if there's errors made, it's not really helpful. If it's not identifying and pinpointing and helping, if we don't know what we're actually testing, it's only as good as their tests. And I don't know. I can't argue any of those things. I'm just saying, like all there, I'm sure there's experts that could analyze all of their analytical methods and all the things that she just listed, and there could be a different expert for all of them and say, well, you're not doing it properly. So it's all up to subjective interpretation, is what I'm saying. What's DNA and where do you find it? He thinks the jurors are dummies. So DNA stands for whatever, however you say that. Uh, di Deoxyribonucleic acid, right? Is that how you say it? It's a biological material that contains an information code, so it serves as a blueprint for how our body is built, how it functions. DNA is passed on from generation to generation, so it's inherited. You inherited half of your DNA from your mother and half of your father. Important to say, it's important to note about DNA that it's found in all cellular material with nuclei. So that would be all the cells within our body, with the exception of red blood cells. You mentioned your DNA work and you mentioned serology. Would you tell us the difference? So, as part of my role as a forensic scientist, I use both serological examinations and DNA analysis. So, serological, or I guess serology, is defined as the study of body fluids. So, a serological examination is an exam that I do to help detect or locate body fluid stains and then identify those body fluid stains. Or I help look for other biological material. DNA analysis is a method that is used to help individualize those body fluid stains to help make conclusions on who may be consistent with that sample to help provide some meaning behind that body fluid sample. What are samples of different sources of DNA? So, most commonly in a serological examination, will see body fluid stains such as blood. Hold on. Before she answers on another long winded tirade of a bunch of BS, you can answer all of these questions in a much more concise and less expert type way and relate more to the jury and get the jury to understand you instead of going on these word salads with big words and long tirades of this stuff. It's going to lose the jurors. At least half of them are probably already lost, is what I'm thinking. So what are examples of different sources of DNA? So, most commonly, in a serological examination, we will see body fluid stains such as blood, seminal material, and saliva. Those are typically good sources of DNA. Other body fluids or materials like vomit, fecal material, and urine might be present on an item, but that is less common in the types of items that we examine, and those are less optimal sources for DNA. In a serological examination, I may be looking for biological material like hair, like the hair that was found in Abby's hand that was never tested. That kind of hair. Like her first example is hair, hair that was found in Abby's hand that may or may not be familial with perhaps a sister or something. Not sure, but it was never tested. So hair may be collected from an item to perform DNA analysis as well, and this is also a less ideal source of DNA. And then finally, it is possible to collect or attempt to collect skin cells from evidentiary items, and the success rate of skin cells is highly variable on evidence, and it's often dependent on the quantity and the quality of that type of sample. So at the top of the if this is a good to bad flow chart of sources of DNA at the very top, good, or maybe okay to say rich source of DNA, would that be appropriate? Yeah, I would. I usually would say good, but a good source of DNA or rich in cellular material would be a blood type sample. So, blood. And by good, you're talking about the quantity of DNA that's available in even a small amount of blood. Yes. Which kind of, what do you mean by good? Yes, which correlates to essentially the number of cells that may be present in that type of body fluid. And what else is up there besides blood at the top of this flowchart? I would assign seminal material and saliva and blood as all good sources of DNA. At the bottom of that chart is skin cells. Again, it's just highly variable. Remember, skin cells, very few skin cells touch DNA in the Idaho 4 case on the knife sheath, supposedly. And she's saying here it's at the very bottom of the chart. There's no DNA in this case that ties Richard Allen to the girls. So why this lady's here doesn't help. It doesn't help the state's case, but her word salads might. Again, it's just, oh, let me start again, over. So at the bottom of this chart is skin cells. Again, it's just highly variable. It all goes back to quantity and quality. So, skin cells, the type of examinations that we do, there could be items that yield an abundance of skin cells, and there may be items that it's hard to detect. Anything, any DNA. And then, if I may elaborate, I don't actually have a test for detecting skin cells. It's just I attempt to collect skin cells off of items, and my tests to see if that was successful or not is based on the quantity of DNA present. So, when you are searching for and analyzing and finding DNA, in that process, you're not identifying it as one of these types of DNA on the flow chart. It's just DNA. Is that correct? The serological examination will help with yielding an identification on whether there's a body fluid or not. The DNA analysis results will just indicate what the DNA profile is. It doesn't indicate that it is blood if that helps make sense. And can you tell in your testing when DNA was deposited on the item that you examined? No, there is not a test that I can perform that will essentially timestamp a DNA profile. That's not possible. You use the word profile. Tell the jury what you mean by DNA profile. A DNA profile is a list of numbers that makes up the genes or the markers that I am analyzing in my analysis. And when you are looking for body fluids, how do you do that? What processes did you do to identify body fluids? So, I will perform a serological examination in order to determine whether a body fluid is present. I first will do a presumptive test, which is a quick, simple, sensitive test it's a chemical test. So, it requires the addition of two chemical components and it may indicate that a body fluid is present. In order to confirm the presence of body fluid, I will do a second test called a confirmatory test, and that test is much more specific to the type of body fluid that I am analyzing and will confirm that a body fluid is present. Is it too simplifying it to say the first stage of that test, you find out whether you might have a body fluid. The second stage is confirming whether you have a body fluid? Yes. I also like to put it as the first test will screen out the samples that are not consistent with the body fluid. Could you briefly describe the process that the laboratory goes through to get a DNA analysis? DNA analysis occurs in several stages. The first step is called extraction, and that's where I add some chemicals. I take a cutting of a sample, add some chemicals to break open the cellular material, and release the DNA. Then I will perform a step called quantification, and in that step, I'll be able to determine how much human DNA and how much male DNA, as well as any inhibition or degradation, is present in a sample. If there's enough DNA present in the sample from that step, I'll continue to the third step, which is called amplification. And in that step, I perform what's called a PCR, or a PCR, which is where I make millions of copies of specific markers or pieces of DNA that are of interest for our analysis. Those pieces of DNA are then separated by size using an electric current, and this is called capillary electrophoresis, something like that. That separation is what allows us to produce the DNA profile. It yields a pattern that essentially I translate into the list of numbers or DNA profile. Okay, I get what she said here. All of it makes sense, but I feel like if a juror were left with all of this, they're just going to be like, oh, so she's smart. She knows what she's doing. And she's got these amazing credentials on her CV, apparently. And even though I don't know if they are. But that's just, a juror who's not really thinking critically might just be like, "Oh, okay, this expert knows what they're talking about and I'm just going to go with what they're saying and trust it." And unfortunately, you cannot do that, especially in a trial when someone's freedom's on the line. But that's what the prosecution would love for the jurors to do, and they got their wish. Anyways, so there are some terms that we're going to come across occasionally that I may stop and ask you to define or explain to us. What is a gene? So a gene is a small, non-coding segment of DNA that we're interested in and analyzing. And what is an allele? An allele is a variant or one of many different forms that may be expressed at the gene. And what is a locus? A locus is the specific location of a gene on the DNA chromosome. Why is DNA analysis performed? Again, DNA analysis is, well, DNA in general is highly variable among individuals. We all have individual DNA profiles, and DNA analysis will allow us to individualize a sample or a body fluid stain to help determine who it may be consistent with. I believe we'll be talking about today's single source and mixture profiles, correct? Yes, sir. And would you explain those to the jury, please? I will use probably throughout my testimony the term single source and mixtures. Single source is terminology used to express that a DNA profile is consistent with a single individual, and so at each of those genes or markers, I am observing up to two alleles in the DNA profile, so that means I am able to confidently determine that it's coming from only one individual. It is single source. A mixture is a DNA profile that is coming from two or more individuals, and those kinds of DNA profiles you will observe multiple alleles at each of the markers that we're analyzing. Are there occasions where you cannot determine the number of contributors to a source or a mixture? Yes, sir. And what does that then pose to you as a DNA analyst? Well, I think first thing we need to step back and talk about just my how I got about analyzing a DNA profile, and essentially the first step is to assess for any biological artifacts that may exist in that DNA profile, and then the following step is to determine how many contributors may be present in a DNA mixture. So those determinations are made. That interpretation of the DNA sample is made prior to looking at any DNA standards associated with the case. Like I mentioned earlier, the quantity and quality of the DNA profile, as well as what type of sample and DNA profile is coming from, all play a factor in a factor in whether I'm able to reasonably determine the number of contributors present in that mixture. We covered some of this, but what type of results may a DNA analysis generate? So the one of the stages that I mentioned earlier called quantification is a step where I can determine how much DNA, how much human DNA, how much male DNA is present, as well as other quality factors about the sample, like inhibition and degradation, that can all be assessed and determined during that stage. If there's not enough human DNA or even enough male DNA present in a sample, then that sample will not continue through the rest of the stages of DNA analysis. So, that is a possible result that may be yielded from my analysis. Also, if there is enough DNA and it completes the DNA analysis process, then it may be suitable for interpretation. So, I may be able to make determinations on the number of contributors and be able to compare it back to known standards in the case. And in that case, I will yield results indicating whether a sample or whether a person could be included or excluded from a sample. Sometimes DNA samples cannot yield conclusive results. Again, based off of the quality and quantity, I may not be able to determine or make conclusions about a sample to make those comparisons back to known standards. Were you asked, in this particular case, to conduct DNA analysis on a number of items that were presented to you beginning in February of 2017? Yes, sir. And under what case number? Case number would be for laboratory number ending in 066. You have that number memorized? I do. Okay, and that resulted in you issuing a report on March the 7th of 2017, correct? That is correct. So we're going to group and just look at that report, that report items. Then the grammar that these people use is terrible. Then we'll move on to another report. other reports. I'm going to begin by handing you States Exhibit 174. I also have here 175. Are you familiar with both of these items? Yes, sir. And how are you familiar with these items? I recognize both of these items as items that I have examined in this case. I can recognize my markings for identification on the outside of the box, which includes my case number, my item number, my initials, and my personal employee number. Each item contains that information here, as well as my initials across the seal right here. And you're familiar with a container and the types of items that are often included inside those boxes, is that correct? Yes, sir. An Indiana SA evidence collection kit is something you examined the contents of on May. That's correct. These specifically, Exhibit 174 is for Abby Williams and is from Abby Williams, and 175 is from Libby German. And you, in your process, go through each sub item in these boxes and make an examination on them? Yes, I did. Would you tell the jury the results of your examination of those items? Yes, sir. The witness says, Your Honor, may I refer to my reports? Court says you may. The witness says, Thank you. So the contents of the evidence collection kits collected from Libby German and Abby Williams contained a series of items. Those items from each kit were vaginal wash samples, vaginal cervical swabs, oral swabs, and anal swabs, external genital swabs, internal genital swabs, fingernail scrapings. In addition, a head hair combing sample was collected from both Libby German and Abby Williams, and a pubic hair combing was collected from Libby German. As I mentioned earlier, my analysis begins with a serological examination, so those items were tested and screened for the presence of seminal material. No seminal material was detected on the contents of the kits that were tested, with the exception of the vaginal cervical swabs from each kit. This gets highly, highly, highly overlooked, underreported. People forget this part. People because the trial itself was not televised, therefore, um nobody really reported on it except independent media, and not everybody, subscribes to that or follows that, or most people get their mainstream narrative from the media and they don't do a whole lot more digging. So the the case, they just make it seem like, or the state, the media makes it seem, and I say state and media because they're one and the same. They push, the media pushes the state's theory, so that's why I say them together. Um, so now I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, everybody just listens to the media pushes the state's theory or narrative, and then people don't question it. They just go along with whatever they're being spoon fed sometimes. I'm not saying you guys. Obviously, you're not because you're here, but some people. So she says no seminal material was detected on the contents of the kits that were tested, with the exception of the vaginal cervical swabs from each kit indicated the possible presence of seminal material, but there was no confirmatory testing performed. Why not? Why the hell not? Why didn't you do more testing? Huge flaw right here. So let's see what else she has to say. Moving on to my DNA. And so, oh, by the way, I was going to point out not just one, but two. She says both kits, each kit. So that means Libby and Abby were likely SA'd. I mean, not likely. I mean, they had to be. They had to be. They're 13 and 14. And Most likely, uh, probably wasn't the first time, at least with one of them. It might have been going on in a home or something. All I want to say. I don't know. I don't know. Or it was completely unrelated, and this is possibly just horrific and tragic and someone unrelated, but I don't know. Family looks very suspicious to me, but all right, so moving on to my DNA analysis results. The contents of both of those evidence collection kits in order. I did the extraction and the quantification, and as part of the quantification step, I analyzed the amount of male DNA present in the samples, and the contents of the kits mostly exhibited no male DNA, with the exception of one set of external genital swabs from Abby Williams and one set of external genital swabs from Libby Williams. So they had DNA swabs on external genital swabs, and they had vaginal cervical. Uh, I don't know if it's on the cervix or what, but we'll see if she says that there was more inside them. But they were definitely, there was some male DNA on their external genitals, which could only get there, in my opinion, by force, as well as one sample from the fingernail scrapings of each of the kits. So there was also male DNA in their fingernails. These samples indicated the presence of male DNA, however, there was an insufficient amount of male DNA for further analysis. But you didn't even do certain testing, so how do you know? So, like I mentioned earlier, given that there was no male DNA or insufficient amount of DNA on the contents of the kits, there was no additional DNA analysis, so no DNA profiles were developed from the contents of the kits. So, back to the presumptive or preliminary result on both victims' kits, where you had a presumptive positive. Did I hear that correctly for seminal material? Yes, sir. You said you did not do a confirmatory test. And why is that? So at this time, or at the time, we were not performing confirmatory tests as part of our workflow for essay kits. Really? Instead, it was a choice to help conserve sample, to take that sample forward for DNA analysis to determine what profile was present on the sample, regardless of whether there was a confirmation of seminal material or not. Huh? That presumptive, and then if you had gone forward with confirmatory, that would have been a serological analysis, correct? That's correct. You wanted to concentrate to save the material for DNA analysis? That's correct. So, an additional serological test could have taken another cutting of that sample, and in order to make the most use of time and resources, it was better just to go forward and see what type of DNA profile was present on that sample. Have you ever had the experience where, on the initial test for seminal material, is followed by a confirmatory test and it's negative? Has that ever happened? Are you asking if the initial test is positive and then the confirmatory test is negative? Yes, that does happen. In that case, or in this case, what was the result of your DNA analysis on those? You said there were both the cervical, vaginal cervical swabs on both victims. There was, yes, the vaginal cervical swabs of both of the kits from both individuals. And what was the result of your DNA analysis on those swabs? So the DNA result indicated that there was no male DNA present on both of those swabs. Now, the areas where you did get a quantity of male DNA, but not enough to develop a profile, did I say that correctly? Yes. One was on a fingernail of, was it Abby Williams or Libby German? one set of fingernail scrapings from both individuals, and the other was on an external genital swab. That's correct. Does the finding of some male DNA on those swabs indicate that that would be or would have been from a perpetrator of a crime? No, it does not. Would you explain that to the jury? Well, I can't make any conclusions about that DNA is attributable to, first of all, because I don't have a DNA profile, but DNA on fingernail scrapings and even external genital swabs, male DNA of the amounts that I was detecting, which is very, very little, isn't necessarily an unusual result off of those types of samples. So she's trying to poo poo away the fact that there's male DNA under their fingernails and genital swabs. She's just trying to like downplay it. I get that. It's typical, you can get DNA from anywhere, but it's not usually typical in homicide victims to have fingernail or to have DNA from someone other than their perpetrators necessarily. Um, the hands and fingernails are every day in contact with items and people, and it's easy to pick up small amounts of male DNA or female DNA from the items that we're handling and touching, as well as the external genital swabs are very much an externally collected sample from the body. That part of our body comes in contact with our clothing, and our clothing could also be carrying DNA just from everyday wear, laundry, household sharing of clothing as well. So you're trying to tell me there's enough DNA from doing laundry in the house to get it on her genital swabs and somehow in her fingernails. That's ridiculous. This is a ridiculous excuse. I don't buy it one bit. So it's if a victim were living with in the same household with males, would you be surprised to find some quantity, insufficient quantity, but some quantity of male DNA in those locations where it was found on those two assay collection kits? I wouldn't be surprised. And when I'm speaking of male DNA, I want to remind you, it is below the amount of male DNA we need to amplify to develop a profile, so it was a very, very little amount of male DNA. So it wouldn't surprise me that it would be coming from the environment or clothing, or, like I said before, previously contacting objections or persons. What? Contacting objections or persons. What does that mean? I'm going to hand to you items 170 to States Exhibits 170 to 173 and ask if those are familiar to you. Yes, I do recognize States Exhibits 170 to 173. In addition to those, I'm going to hand you to examine 151, 152, 53, 54, 55. Take a look at those and tell us if you recognize that packaging. Yes, I do. And how do you recognize them? I recognize the packages again from my markings, which are included in a boxed area on each of the packages, including the case number and item number, my initials, and employee number. Each package has several of my initials across the seals. If I might hand you these items as well, States Exhibit 149, 150, and 156, do you recognize? Mr. Luttrell says, what numbers are those? Or I'm sorry, Ms. Auger says, Mr. Luttrell, what numbers are those? Mr. Luttrell says, States Exhibits 149, 150, and 156. She says, thank you, sorry. He says, no. Then he says, yes, I recognize these as well. Sorry, my hips are hurting. I'm trying to shift the weight off, and it's not easy. All of the items submitted to you that you reported on in your May or May 7th report, have you recorded from whom you received them? Yes, that is recorded in chain of custody maintained in our laboratory. Can you tell the jury from whom you received each of these items? Oh, thank you. So, all of these items were submitted to the laboratory by Sergeant Brian Olahy. We heard his testimony, and I received the majority of them directly from Sergeant Olahy on February 17th, 2017, with the exception of laboratory items 17, 18, and 27, which went for a trace examination once they were submitted into the laboratory. So, I received them directly from the trace examiner after their analysis. One other thing that I want to circle back to very quickly on these evidence collection kits, States Exhibits 174 and 175, in addition to doing an examination of unknowns, did you use any material in 174 and 175 to create a known standard? Yes. And I appreciate you bringing that up because I did delay in, or I did hesitate in mentioning that I also did receive DNA blood standards from Abby Williams and Libby German as part of their evidence collection kit. And how did you then use those blood collections that you received in both those two collection kits? How did you use those throughout your examination? Yes, those two blood samples were used as the DNA standard, so the known sample for Libby German and Abby Williams throughout my analysis in this case. Okay, now I put you through a bundle of numbers, and you have numbers. Sergeant Olahy had numbers, and now the court has numbers. Can I ask you to describe your results from the items that I've handed you and you've identified? How can I help you do that? Yes, I would like to refer to those by laboratory item number since that's how I have the documentation throughout my case number, if that works. He says, let's take these if you're okay with this number at a time, and then tell us, if you can, what your results were. So, first, I would like to start with the laboratory items 1, 2, 8, and 9, which were States Exhibits 170 through 173. These were swabs collected from the body of Libby German. Each of these samples were examined. A serological exam was performed for the presence of blood, and blood was detected on laboratory items 1, 8, and 9. Item 2 indicated the possible presence of blood. However, I did not do the confirmatory testing due to the amount of stain that was available. I wanted to preserve the stain for DNA analysis. In my DNA analysis of each of these four samples, I was looking for the presence of male DNA, much like I did with the components of the evidence collection kit. So they were extracted and quantification was performed, and it was analyzed for the presence of male DNA. There was no male DNA detected on item 2, which was the swab of the right upper thigh. Items 1, the swab of the left thigh. Item 8, the swab of the right breast. And item 9, the swab of the left breast indicated an insufficient amount of male DNA present on those samples. But that's way too many of her private parts that have male DNA that I feel comfortable with. I don't feel comfortable with any of it, but I definitely don't feel comfortable with all three locations. Her genitals, her and both breasts. She had male DNA. You're telling me that's just a coincidence and that was just laundry? I don't buy that. No. Doesn't make sense to me. Moving on to the next set of samples, these samples, items 20, 21, 22, 26, and 27, were swabs collected from the body of Libby German, or they were fibrous material that was collected and submitted to the laboratory from the body of Libby German. So, like the swabs I mentioned previously, they were analyzed for the presence of blood, and that test is determined from my visual observations of what the swab looks like, which means it had staining that indicated a need for that type of test. So, serological testing indicated the possible presence of blood on item 20, which was the swab of the left wrist of Libby German, 21, the swab of the inside right wrist of Libby German, item 26, which was the swab of the thigh from Libby German, and then item 22, blood was confirmed as present. Item 27 was that fibrous material I mentioned. There was no serological testing performed on the fibrous material. Instead, it was microscopically examined to determine whether it was a human hair. So, fibrous material to determine, looked at under a microscope to determine if it was human hair. And the result from that did indicate that it was a human hair from the left pinky finger of Libby German. However, that human hair did not have a root present on the hair, which means it was not able to be used for DNA analysis. Back to the remaining swabs, they were assessed again for the amount of male DNA, and that is, given that they are blood swabs from the individual, I was looking specifically to determine if there is a male foreign contributor. On item 20, item 21, and item 26, there was no male DNA detected. Item 27, oh, sorry, excuse me, item 22, item 22 did indicate a slight amount of male DNA, but it was insufficient for further analysis. My last set of samples, two of these samples, laboratory item 17 and laboratory item 18, were submitted as fibrous material from the hand of Abby Williams and the left arm of Abby Williams. And the final sample was a swab from a tree, laboratory item 28. The fibers were examined again microscopically, determined that it was indeed human hair. Item 17, so both of the girls had human hair in their hands, apparently. Item 17 and two hair had two sorry, item 17 had two hair present inside of it. Both of those hairs were consistent with human hair, and both had a root present on the hair. So that is the hair sample collected on Abby was what she just explained. The root from the first hair within item 17 yielded a DNA profile which originally was found to be consistent with an unknown female. So that profile was compared back to the DNA profiles of Abby and Libby and found not to be consistent with them. The second hair within item 17 did not have enough DNA present for further analysis. The hair within item 18 also had a root present, was consistent with human hair, and that hair did not have enough DNA for further analysis. How? You had the root. And then the final item here, the swab of the tree, which was laboratory item 28, was tested for the presence of blood and it indicated a possible presence of blood on that swab. And again, I did not perform confirmatory testing in order to preserve the sample for DNA analysis. A DNA profile was determined from laboratory item 28, the swab of the tree, and that profile was found to be consistent with the DNA profile of Libby. So the blood on the tree was Libby's. The swab from the tree? Yes, sir. Does that complete? Did you go through each one of those? I believe I got them. If the record showed that the first group of envelopes that you looked at that followed your discussion of the collection kits all came from the autopsy, that would be your item 100, 101, 107, and 108. Is that consistent with your documentation? Those item numbers are referring to the agency item number, so that's the CSI's item number. My item numbers are 1, 2, 8, and 9. I'm sorry, yes. How many friggin' pieces of evidence, or how many items numbers does one piece of evidence need? Um, I'm I've now confused the numbering system. States exhibits 170, 171, 172, and 173 are what you had previously described. Did those all were they all collected at the autopsy? I believe that is the information that I have received about those swabs. Yes. Did you do further examination of the hair found on Abby's finger that was identified as an unknown female? Yes. Given that it was a known profile, would compare that or use it for comparison if needed. Yes. And in examining that DNA profile on the strand of material, the hair, On the right hand of Abby Williams, States Exhibit 149, were you able to make any conclusions about that DNA profile on that hair? Well, right away, as I mentioned, I compared that DNA profile back to Abby Williams and Libby German as being the standards I had available for me at the time. And in doing that, I could tell you that it was not consistent with either of their profiles, but I did recognize that there was some similarities. There were some similarities between the female profile and the profile of Libby. So it's a family similarity to Libby's family, someone in Libby's family. So that led me to believe that it could have been a biological relative of Libby at the time. Did you later, Ms. Bozinovski, did you later in March of 2017 receive what I've marked as States Exhibit 284, which is your lab number, item 246? Did you later receive this? I did receive this. I can't recall the exact date, and I can refer to my chain of custody if you would like me to recall that. But I did receive this item. I have examined this item, and I recognize it again by my packaging, my markings on the packaging. And what is that item? This item is a DNA standard collected from Derek German. Identified to you as the father of Libby? That was the information that was provided to me at the time that it was submitted to the laboratory. So they're sampling that hair versus Derek German, the father of Libby. Mr. Luttrell says I would like to move the admission of Exhibit 284. Ms. Auger has no objection. Court says all right, without objection, it's admitted. And did your examination of Derek German's, well, excuse me, let me back up. Were you able to develop a DNA profile for Derek German from that standard? Yes, sir. And does that DNA profile give you more information in your opinion on the hair identified as coming from an unknown female that came from the hand of Abby Williams? For the DNA profile, it was submitted for comparison to items that I had in this case, but given, never mind, I'll just keep going. But given that I had already come to the determination that I believe that profile to be a relative of Libby German, a comparison was completed with the profile of Derek German, and again, it just further supported my belief that the profile of the female individual was a relative of Libby German. Okay, but well, first of all, did it match? You didn't really say. Um, it just further supported. She said it just further support. I believe that profile to be a relative of Libby German, but she doesn't say much more. She just says it just further supported my belief. What did? What? It. Her comparison. Completed her comparison. Further supported her belief that it came from. Okay, so I guess that's what she's saying, but it's still I think we're missing a link here. I think they're leaving something out. And also, by the way, why are if it's a female hair, a long female hair, most likely, because that's I think that's what it was described as. They thought like it was some fiber. They thought it was this long hair wrapped around her finger. Wouldn't it be I don't know how long Derek German's hair is, but I'm assuming go after the male, or you don't go after the male, you go after the females of the family, like the grandma and the sister, to try to match that. I don't know why they went after the father. I get that there's like paternity type of testing, but it doesn't make any sense if it's more likely to be female's hair. But I'm not a scientist, I don't know. So maybe that is how they do it. By examining Derek German's DNA profile, did it narrow the familial relationship that you believed was behind the identity of the unknown female? So we know it's a female hair. So again, why are we testing males? It just showed some consistencies that you would expect among biological relatives that showed that the profile from the unknown is not only could it be a relative of Libby German, but it also appeared that it could be a relative of Derek German. You also knew that Abby Williams was found wearing Libby German's sweatshirt. That information was provided to you, correct? Yes, I was. Wasn't that convenient? If maybe you were involved in a crime, I'm not saying Kelsey is, and I don't want any kind of backlash from the family, but if you were involved in a crime and your hair just happened to be on someone, wouldn't it be convenient that you happen to put a sweatshirt or lend your sweatshirt to your little sis so that maybe that DNA, there'd be an excuse for your DNA on someone? Why was it on Abby? Why is it in her, like wrapped around her hands? It's not just like it's intertwined in their clothes, it's actually in Abby's hand. Like perhaps maybe she was fighting for dear life and grabbed someone's hair. I don't know. Kind of an observation using my common sense, which this investigation lacks. Did you share your conclusions that your examination of that unknown female profile and your examination of Libby's profile and her father Derek German's profile led you to believe that not only was it a female, but it was a female relative? Did you communicate that to your investigators? That was communicated just through investigative meetings and discussions that I had with the investigators. It was never in a report of any sort, as we don't make those types of conclusions without DNA standards from an individual. We don't include, I should say, those types of conclusions in our report. Then, early this month, October 2024, I informed you that I was asking that you receive a standard of Kelsey German Siebert's DNA. Is that correct? I think that you inquired about it even earlier than October. I believe we discussed it at the end of September. We talked about whether a DNA standard was submitted yet for the biological relatives. And did you receive a standard from the sister, Kelsey German? Yes, I did. And were you able to develop a DNA profile? I was. And what was your conclusion regarding the unknown female on the hair on the right hand of Abby Williams? So the unknown female profile that was from one of the hairs on laboratory item 17, the hair from the right hand was found to be consistent with Kelsey German Siebert and is estimated to occur than or once in more than 8 trillion unrelated individuals. So it is confirmed that the hair wrapped around Abby's fingers, possibly even the hair, it's not confirmed about the hair on Libby, but it's probably consistent and probably the same, would be Kelsey's hair. Although you never know, it could be grandma's hair. I don't know. Maybe it's a whole family affair down by the creek there. I don't know. Not allegedly. I'm just saying nothing in this case makes sense. And there are things that I find suspicious about the family. I'm going to hand to you what's been marked or admitted into evidence as 1, States Exhibit 148 for your records. It's item 16. Can you tell the jury if you recognize that packaging? Yes, I do recognize the packaging. And did you receive that item at the same time that you received the items from the autopsy and from the swab of the tree and other swabs taken at the crime scene? Yes, sir. And what is it? States Exhibit 148, which is my laboratory item 16, is the cartridge that I've examined in this case. That came to you with all the other crime scene packaging? Yes. in the initial exam. Yes, it was included as part of the original submission for this case. I received it on February 17th, 2017, along with other items I've examined and previously talked about. And did you examine the contents of it? I examined the item which was in the packaging, yes. Did you document and note the condition it was in when you received it? I did. And what can you tell the jury about your documentation and what you know about the condition of that item? Your Honor, I'd like to refer to my notes on my laptop if that's possible. The court says, you may. The witness says, thank you. So my notes, it says question here, but this is the answer. It says, so my notes indicate that I received the brown paper bag, which was sealed with clear packaging tape. Inside of that brown paper bag was a manila envelope, which was also signature sealed with clear packaging tape. In addition, there was loose debris present inside the brown paper bag. Upon opening up the manila envelope, I observed one cartridge which had an imprint on it, Winchester 40 S&W. Also contained loose debris, which appears to be plant material. I did not determine any visible ridge detail. The cartridge appeared slightly dirty. In my examination, I did not perform any serological analysis. I did take one swab of the entire surface of the cartridge. Upon taking that swab, I noted that the swab had a light brown, dirt-like staining present on it. Why'd you swab it? So, as part of my examination, I first did a visual exam to see if there's any kind of body fluid that warranted testing on that sample. There was nothing that warranted testing for a body fluid. So then I attempted to collect any potential skin cells that may have been on the surface of the cartridge. Swabbing is the method in which I collect anything that might exist on this surface area. Well, couldn't you dust it for prints before you even do any of that? I mean, people have to touch the bullet to get it inside their magazine. So, didn't they do any kind of fingerprint testing? You received this item amongst the other items received by you on February 17th directly from the hand of Sergeant Olahi. Yes, I did. In swabbing it, in doing that process with a moist swab, would you have removed dirt as that was on it? Yes. So part of the process is to wetten a swab with a drop of water. So in doing that, yes, the swabbing would have removed the dirt that was present on that sample. And you had dirt on the swab, or you had a substance that looked like dirt on the swab when you were finished? Right. And it warranted me documenting that in my notes because I felt like we hadn't yet discussed this yet, but I feel like dirt could be impacting my ability to get a profile off of that sample, and that's why I noted its presence on the item. I'm going to hand you a box of gloves and a scissors, and a scissors. Ask that you open the outer packaging of State's Exhibit 148. Do you care where I open it at? I do not. Okay. You have a process you try to follow when you do this, is that right? I do. And this item's been opened before? It has. So I'm going to try to open it on a different side than has previously been opened. For the record, would you describe it when you remove it from the bag? I have removed the contents of the bag, which include a manila envelope that was the original manila envelope included in this packaging. I recognize again this envelope by my markings right here, which are not in the box here, but they do include the case number, item number, my initials, my employee number. In addition, there is a piece of white paper that has been sealed across all of the edge. This paper I recognize again by my markings on the outside as well as my initials across the seals on both edges. Did you create that item there? That did you fold that paper? Yes, sir. And what's inside that? This is what I referred to as exam paper. It is the paper that I performed my examination on. It is retained in items in which there might be loose trace evidence or debris that I want to preserve. So, in when I received this cartridge, there was loose debris, specifically appeared like plant material to me, and I wanted to retain it. So the paper is folded and sealed into a bindle, and each of the sides of the bindle are then appropriately sealed so nothing can come out of it. I'm going to ask you to remove the contents of the envelope that was inside the bag in States Exhibits 148, if you would please. And what's the contents of that envelope? Within the envelope is a cartridge. And is there at the back the head stamp of that cartridge? Are you able to see the back? I can see the print on the end of the cartridge, and I can confirm by looking at my notes that this is consistent with what I've written down as part of my examination. A Winchester 40 Smith& Wesson round. I am no firearms examiner, but it does say Winchester 40 S&W, which is exactly what I've written down in my notes. And would you just hold that up for the jury so they can see it? Did you mark it yourself? No, sir. And why is that? At the time of the examination, there was still a pending examination, which means it needed to have additional analysis, so I did not place any markings on that item, as I didn't want to interfere with the additional analysis that needed to be performed. But you were first in line to look at that in the laboratory? Yes. And you also gave it a look over for latent prints. Why did you do that? Sergeant Olahi and I discussed whether a latent print examination was necessary on this item. A lot of times, with items such as these, we have our investigators make that consideration, and when we have something as small as this, it's nearly impossible to do both a latent print exam and a DNA analysis exam. So we had that discussion, and it was decided that DNA would be the preferred analysis for this item. Sorry, I can't remember what I was going to say. That's all right. But you could not see any latent prints visible, is that right? That's where I was going. So I did just kind of visually examine the item to see if there was any kind of visible prints. Now, we know latent prints are not typically visible to the eye, but I wanted to know whether there was any type of ridge detail that I could observe. Sometimes, if you have prints in like blood or something with grime or debris on it, that you might be able to see to kind of see ridge detail. So, even though we weren't doing a latent print exam, I wanted to know whether there was a print visible. If there would have been something that was present in kind of like a body fluid or a grease-like stain, then I would have then had further discussion with the investigator to determine if maybe we should have done that latent print exam. What has been your success rate and your DNA office's units success rate with unspent cartridges and other ammunition? So, unspent and even spent cartridges are very difficult to get DNA profiles on, and it really just, again, depends on the quantity and quality of the sample. But you all saw how small that was when I held it up. My swabbing is designed to collect as many skin cells as possible. I need to have an abundance of skin cells present on your object to have enough DNA to develop a DNA profile. So we have found that in our research in our laboratory, we have found that cartridges are not successful. And since 2017, we have removed them from analysis in our laboratory, for DNA. They go on either latent print and especially firearm tool marks. I believe that even latent print analysis has taken cartridges out of the scope of their examinations as well. And again, it just goes back to the amount of surface area and the success rates from these types of items. What was the result of your examination of your item 16, States Exhibit 148? So I took a swab of that cartridge. I used that swab entirely, which means I consumed the sample entirely to maximize my opportunity of getting a DNA profile. The DNA result from that cartridge demonstrated an insufficient quantity of DNA for further analysis. The jury has seen photographs of two Chuck Taylor Converse All-Star shoes, a right and a left shoe. Did you examine those two such items and are they here? States Exhibit 146 and 147. Yes, sir. I have examined these items, States Exhibit 146 and 147. They are laboratory items 14 and 15. And items 177, identified as a sweatshirt with the word German printed on it. States Exhibit 177, did you examine this? Yes, sir. I also examined this item. I recognize it again by my markings. I'm going to show you States Exhibit 178, identified as a shoe. No, I'm sorry, as Maurice brand jeans. States Exhibit 178, I also recognize as my laboratory item 30 and my markings as well. Would you tell the jury the results of your examination, beginning with the right and left Converse shoes, and then the sweatshirt and the Maurice jeans? So, beginning with the shoes, as with all of these items I mentioned so far, I performed a serological examination. So, I started with a visual exam and write down or indicate on my notes what I'm observing, what I see from the item. There was discoloration present on the tennis shoes that warranted me testing it for the presence of blood. And on item 14, there was no blood detected on that shoe. However, I did take 8 swabs of the shoe, and at that point, I was trying to collect any type of skin cells that may have been on the shoe to see who may have handled that item. Item 15, serological examination did indicate the presence of blood, so blood was detected in one area on item 15. Now, that was an area on the outside tongue of the Converse shoe. I also took 8 swabs from item 15 for collection of possible skin cells from that item as well. The analysis of items 14 and 15, those swabs, 1 swab from 14 and one swab from item 14 of the shoe was consistent with Abby Williams. It's also estimated to occur in once in more than 8 trillion individuals. 1 swab from item 15 was found to be a mixture of 2 individuals, and that mixture, Abby Williams and Libby German, could be excluded as possible contributors, and that is estimated in 1 in 14 unrelated individuals could contribute to that mixture. So, 2 unidentified individuals. There's a mixture of 2 unidentified individuals on one of Abby's shoes. The remaining swabs of the shoes yielded a variety of results. Some were partial DNA profiles in which I could not determine the number of contributors, so I was not able to make any further conclusions. Others had no conclusions drawn because they had a failed quantification test control. That quantification test control is a check that is used to check for inhibition on a sample. So essentially, I was detecting inhibition on the swabs of the shoe, and therefore I didn't have enough DNA detected to determine a profile, but I also couldn't be confident necessarily in my quantification of that amount of DNA because the positive control was failing and it was failing due to inhibition. You've used the word inhibition and degradation. Would you describe those a little bit more for the jury and how they impact your ability as a DNA analyst? Well, like I mentioned earlier, we have a part of a process can detect inhibition and degradation. So that was detected. So this result that she didn't answer what it is though. This result that I'm giving you is the result of that detection method. So it indicates these swabs of the shoes were inhibited and could not go on for further analysis. Essentially, inhibition is affecting the quality of the DNA profile and degradation as well. So I might be able to detect DNA, but I'm not going to be able to get a complete DNA result or even a suitable result that is suitable for interpretation because of the degradation and inhibition. I'm getting very, very limited information out of my DNA profile. Do your notes reflect anything about the condition on which about the condition or what the source of the inhibition may be on either shoe? Yes, if I may refer. Sure. So item 14 and item 15, I have indicated that the shoe is heavy with soil and dirt and plant material. Yes, sorry, I wanted to read it all. It indicates that I was observing very heavy soil, dirt, and plant material on that shoe. To be honest, the shoe was very dirty, as you know shoes can be, but there was an abundance. It wasn't just the shoe or the bottom of the shoe, like the shoe, every part of the shoe. And given that they're Converse shoes, they were fabric, not leather, so that dirt was really embedded into the fabric material. Would you describe what were your findings in relation to your examination of the sweatshirt? I apologize, I haven't completed my results for item 15 yet. The shoe? Yes. Which shoe are we talking about? The left shoe. Item 15, which was the left shoe, yes. Okay, go ahead. So I did mention that I did detect blood on one cutting of or on one sample of that shoe. So blood was detected on the tongue area of the shoe. The cutting of that shoe yielded a profile that was a mixture of two individuals. The major profile of that mixture was found to be consistent with Libby German and estimated to occur in once in more than 8 trillion unrelated individuals. A minor profile was present, and that minor profile was consistent with Abby Williams and estimated to occur once in 66 million unrelated individuals. And that was on the tongue of the shoe? Yes, sir. Were there other findings in relation to your items 14 and 15, the Converse shoes, that you wanted to share? At this time, it's just worth mentioning that my visual exam included collecting hair as well and doing microscopic examination of hair. There was hair present, but it was found not to be consistent with human hair. So your examination of the sweatshirt, that's an item that you looked at on multiple occasions, correct? Yes, sir. And in your initial exam on the March 7th report, could you summarize your results of the sweatshirt? A visual examination was done of the sweatshirt. I will quickly note my visual appearances. With the black sweatshirt, I noted that there was heavy, saturated red staining present in the back, the hoodie area, the upper shoulders, and the front neck of the black hoodie. There was heavy plant material present it appears dirty with heavy soil, dirt, sand. All of that sand, soil, and dirt was also detected during my visual examination in which I was using an alternate light source. The alternate light source, UV and infrared light, kind of enhanced the dirt and sand, and I was observing on the item as well. The serological testing of the sweatshirt indicated that blood was detected. I examined the sweatshirt for seminal material. No seminal material was detected. I examined 11 cuttings from the sweatshirt, and some of those cuttings were from blood areas. Others were just areas that either fluoresced or it had like a small whitish stain that was of interest to me. I also took 3 swabs of the sweatshirt. Those swabs were from the outside cuff and sleeve areas of the sweatshirt, as well as the front pockets of the sweatshirt, and I did microscopic examinations of hair from the sweatshirt as well. And there were several hairs that were consistent with human and had root material present, so they were available for DNA analysis. So, of the 11 cuttings, 8 of the cuttings were found to be consistent with Abby Williams and are estimated to occur once in more than 8 trillion unrelated individuals. The other three cuttings were found to be mixtures of two individuals, and Libby and Abby could not be excluded as contributors to that mixture. There is a variety of statistical calculations for those three results. The first cutting was estimated to occur once in more than 50 unrelated individuals. The second is it the second is estimated that 1 in 230 billion individuals would contribute to the mixture. And for the third cutting, it is estimated that 1 in 290 million unrelated individuals would contribute to that mixture. Do you think the jury listened to all of that? I would have tuned the F out. They needed to break it down individually, but this judge just lets her go on rambling rants, and the jury doesn't, or I'm sorry, the defense doesn't object, and so that's why she's getting away with it. And those were mixtures in which you were able to include Abby Williams and Libby German, or you could not exclude them. How would you characterize and articulate that? It was a mixture of two individuals, and both Abby Williams and Libby German were consistent with the DNA profile completely, so they appear to be consistent with that mixture. And was the hair found to be an insufficient quantity of DNA? Yes, it was. And I also have results for those three swabs that I took. So the two cuffed areas and the swab of the front pocket. So only one of those swabs yielded an interpretable result. That was the swab of a cuffed area, and it was found to be consistent with Abby Williams and estimated to occur once in more than 8 trillion. The other two swabs from the pocket and the other sleeve demonstrated the presence of a mixture in which the number of contributors could not be reasonably assumed or determined. Thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to note to the jury about the examination of the sweatshirt? Not at this time. Did you examine these Maurice genes that I believe were identified as taken from the body of Abby Williams? Is that correct? Yes, sir. And would you summarize your findings for the jury of the genes? Again, I examined the genes for the presence of any type of body fluids, noted in my visual examination that there was heavy dirt-like staining present throughout the genes. Were you able to characterize when you say dirt? Did you have any appearance to you that you were able to note in terms of clay or sand or just dirt? Anything about that? I didn't really make any conclusions. I'm not qualified to make conclusions as to what kind of dirt, but I did occasionally note whether it was sand-like substance or mud. That's kind of as far as I got with my description on how that dirt appeared. Did you have both on that? Here, I've indicated mud dirt areas were enhanced with my infrared light and my ultraviolet light, so that's what I was most likely observing. So, in my serological examination, there was a lot of that dirt-like staining, and you can't really see underneath dirt to see what's there. So what I was doing was kind of testing for representative areas of the gene to see what might have been embedded under the dirt. So several areas were tested on the gene for the presence of blood and seminal material. There was no seminal material detected on the genes. Several areas indicated the possible presence of blood on the genes. Confirmatory testing was performed, and I did not confirm the presence of blood. I ended up performing DNA analysis on 10 cuttings from the genes, in addition to two swabs. One swab was on the crotch area of the genes, and one swab was from the button or zipper area of the genes. I also did a microscopic examination of the hair that was collected, and there was one hair collected from the genes that had a root, so DNA analysis was performed on that. Starting with that result, the hair failed to demonstrate a sufficient quantity of DNA. The one cutting of the genes yielded a profile that was consistent with Abby Williams. A second cutting of the genes yielded a profile that was a mixture of two individuals, Libby German, and a laboratory individual could not be excluded as the possible contributors. So on Abby's genes, there was possible mixture of Abby and Libby or Abby and a laboratory staff member. So that's not good that the laboratory staff member could possibly match the mixture. It's contaminated, perhaps that's what that means. So there, the remaining samples either failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA or I was unable to determine the number of contributors, so I was not able to make conclusions. The swabs that I took from the jeans, the swabs from the bottom of the zipper, failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA, and the swab from the inside of the jeans yielded a mixture of two people. The major profile was consistent with Libby German, estimated to occur once in more than 8 trillion, and the minor profile is consistent with Abby Williams and estimated to occur in 100 unrelated individuals. That is all the results I have for item 30. Thank you. May we approach, Your Honor, says Mr. Luttrell. The court says you may. Mr. Luttrell says, just ready to move to the second and third. Court says, okay. Exams. Court says, do we need to take a break? Mr. Luttrell says, I'd like to go move this evidence so we can get the other set. Court says, okay, so this would be a good time to take a break then. Turn your microphone back on. It's off. You turned it off. Mr. McLeland says, Judge, I don't know if you've been something inaudible and all points bulletin something something by the jury. Her vehicle was found in the area. It's unoccupied and we believe she's in court in the audience. I just thought I'd give you inaudible. Isn't it funny how the inaudible seems to exclude that there might be someone else in the jury who doesn't belong there? I don't know. I just thought I'd give you something something. We do believe she's the one that something something the jury and was attempting to photograph the jury. Ms. Auger says, who's this? Her name is Lana Oriani. Oh, that's funny. Isn't that the chick from Truth and Transparency? The court says this is the McLeland says she was the one in Fort Wayne and she was so I just wanted to keep you in the loop. Court says, okay. Mr. McLeland says, something's inaudible, but I didn't want something to happen and me not tell you. Ms. Auger says, is she a something something, this woman, or is she? McLeland says she's a YouTuber, and Ms. Auger says, oh my God. Mr. McLeland says something something back in Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne police addressed it with her, and we put her out her vehicle description. The court says, mm-hmm. Mr. McLeland says, we found her vehicle about 2 blocks from the courthouse. It was unoccupied. We think she's in the audience, but we're not 100% sure. So the court says, do your people know what she looks like? They do, says McLeland. The court says, okay. So what? Can't she not be there? They saw her walking something something, and so I don't know if Jason and Jeremy know something something. The court says, so we can take a break and we'll discuss that. Sidebar conference concluded. The court says, all right, this is a good time for us to take a break. The state needs to move this evidence and bring over some more evidence, and we'll give you a break while that's happening. While you're outside the courtroom, please keep your minds open. Please don't form any opinions or conclusions about anything. You may discuss the evidence that you've heard so far, but please only do so if all 15 of you are present and in the jury room at the same time. Please don't deliberate. Gentlemen, all rise. The jury leaves the courtroom. The court says you may be seated. So, Ms. Bozinovski, you can go ahead and step down from the stand while we take our break. You may need a break also. And those of you in the audience, if you'd like to sit tight for a minute, gentlemen, you may take Mr. Allen. Mr. Rosie says, I didn't hear what you said. She says, I said, gentlemen, you may take Mr. Allen. Mr. Rosie says, oh, thank you. Ms. Auger says, thank you. The court says, and let's take about 15 minutes. Jody, you can go off the record. And this is where we're going to end for this episode. We'll continue when we go back on the record tomorrow in the next episode. So thank you guys for watching. Please hit the like button if you haven't done so already. And I will see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye now.